So the previous three speakers have spoken about cybersecurity and how it is going to impact business. I will change the tone of the evening a little, and I'm going to talk about nation as a whole. How, in the digital age, what are the kind of challenges and threats that India as a nation faces? So perhaps it's a little different from what Vivek has spoken about, or what Pawan has spoken about. And this is just a word about myself. A long tenure in the army. Post that, last 2 years, I've been working in the corporate world as a consultant and advisor on issues regarding cyber security. I've authored a book titled Cyber Warfare, Its Implication on National Security. I have been part of a panel discussion at the CSIS Washington and East West Institute at New York. And I also participate in a number of discussions on cyber law and cyber forensic. In fact, one of them is common. Pawan and me talk on the same platform once in a while. All right. So if I talk about the kind of major threats that our nation faces today in the digital age, it will perhaps take me, I can write a book on it actually. So to name a some is the kind of threat that our critical infrastructure is facing, the aspects of cybercrime, which the previous three speakers have spoken about, the lack of organizational structure in this country to fight this organized threat that is India is facing. Lack of data protection. Every country in this globe has a data protection policy or a law, but India is one of those exceptions. Despite being the second most populated country in the world, we still don't really feel that data protection is that important for our citizens, and it is still not there. The kind of regulatory framework, the law enforcement agency and judiciary, how they lack knowledge and wherewithal to fight cybercrime. Use of the dark web in by the Indians. India use, it is a surprising statistics that Indians are the highest user of the dark web. A lack of cyber hygiene in general in organizations, in government organizations, in the private sector, personal usage of the internet. Lack of a cyber secure ecosystem in an organization, and so on and so forth. I mean, there is, as I said, I can write a book on the kind of challenges that our country faces, but in 15 minutes I will be only able to do justice to one of these things, and I will therefore speak on the aspect of the threat to critical infrastructure of this country. Now, I like to begin my talks always with this famous slide of mine. We live in very, very difficult times. In good old times, when one had to rob a bank, you had to get hold of a weapon, walk into the bank, and tell the cashier, put up your hands in the air and give me all your money. And the police would land up on the crime scene, and based on the kind of evidence that you left behind, you would either be caught or you could go scot-free. Things have changed very drastically in the last few years. Today, you can steal the bigger amounts of money that you could do physically by sitting in the comfort of your home, maybe sitting in a Starbucks cafe or the airport and lounge of an airport, and could transfer that money in form of digital currency to a third country, and from where you could bring it back into your own account. And our law enforcement agencies and the judiciary is not yet prepared to take kind of actions against you, what it could have done in if you committed the crime in the physical world. Now, coming to the topic of the threat to critical info infrastructure. Now, before I actually go into the threat, we need to understand what actually is critical info infrastructure, because this is the term which is being thrown around very often in various forums which deal with cybersecurity. But a large number of us actually do not really understand what is critical infrastructure and what is critical info infrastructure. So let me just quickly tell you what is the difference. Now, if we see the government outlay for various 5-year plans till the 12th plan, you'll realize that there are certain infrastructure where the government has spent a large amount of money, namely railway, telecom, roadways, electricity. Almost 77.5%, 77.5% of government planned outlay was spent on this. And if you include irrigation into this, then almost 85%, 86% of money of the government spending was on these 5 kind of infrastructure, which means that these are those infrastructures which are actually critical for the public, without which the life and security and safety of public, perhaps, of course, we are leaving defense out of it. Defense doesn't form part of critical infrastructure. It is above the critical infrastructure. So without these infrastructure, the well-being of the public of India could become a jeopardy, and things could go wrong. Hence, a major spending of the government happens here, and these are the structures we call as critical infrastructures. Now, what is critical information infrastructure? These are those infrastructures which are completely dependent on information infrastructure, namely the internet or networks or smart systems and things like that. Now, let's for example take irrigation. Now, irrigation happens in India it starts from the dam. There is a canal through which the water flows, goes into the field. Not really much of networking is required in this. Even if there are certain computers or networks that are used, is perhaps at the dam to control the flow of water, and thereafter the water just flows and the farmers use this water. So even if there was no information infrastructure or network, the irrigation system, which is a critical infrastructure, would yet continue to work the way it was working. Now, let's for example take roadways. Now, roadways has over the last few years in India has become more and more automated. We have smart cards on our cars now, or those RFID tags where you can pass through a toll without any issue. We have these smart systems in smart cities where the red light and the green light, the traffic lights are controlled by smart systems and artificial intelligence based control systems. So those are systems which partially depend on these are infrastructures which partially depend on information infrastructure, and hence if the networks fail, then they will continue to function, but their efficiency will go down quite a bit. And then there is a third kind of infrastructure, for example banking or telecom, which are completely dependent on networks. These are the systems which I refer to as critical information infrastructure, and these are the kind of infrastructure which face maximum amount of threat from the cyberspace, and we as a country need to ensure that this threat is mitigated. All right, now coming to, so we have understood what is critical infrastructure. So why is there a threat to critical infrastructure, CII as I call it? The threat is because of various reasons. Firstly, it is because as I just mentioned, there are these systems like banking which are completely dependent on networks, and they cannot survive without these network systems. So hence, there is bound to be threat when you are using the cyberspace for your routine functioning. There are bound to be threats which exist in the cyberspace which will impact you also. The second is the use of open networking standards and protocols. Now, moment you use open networking standard protocols and standards, the threats that are associated with it will automatically get inbuilt into your infrastructure. Use of less secure operating system. Now, it is very, a lot of time people say that why don't we just develop proprietary kind of operating systems for, say, nuclear power plants or for electrical power grids and stuff like that. Well, it is easy to say, but the kind of money involved in research and development of such proprietary operating system is, this cost is prohibitive. So if it was $100 to use the Windows operating systems, perhaps developing a proprietary operating system will cost you something like hundreds and $100,000. So that is the kind of ratios that have. Now, next important aspect is convergence of network. Now, what is convergence of networks? Let's, for example, take the power grid. So there is a place from where power is being produced. So that is being controlled by networks. Then there is an agency which is distributing this power. So there is a network and there are smart systems which are controlling this. Then there is an agency which is distributing it within a township and billing it. So there is this distribution control system. Now, when you converge all these three kind of systems of your power grid, the vulnerabilities of one network will become the vulnerability of overall network. So hence, as you converge more and more network to make it more efficient, you are bringing in more and more chances of something going wrong to the entire network. And lastly is that CII is owned by power sector. Now, this is a very typical thing with the critical infrastructure, whether it is power, whether it is telecom, whether it is banking. Today, the private players, private companies play as important role as the government does, or maybe even more important role. If you take banking, it is, I think, the number of private banks are much more, and their reach is far and wide as compared to the government banks. So when you have two different players, you have the government and you have the private sector, both running the infrastructure, yet there is no common kind of standards that are laid down for protection of this infrastructure. There is bound to be a threat to the infrastructure. Now, let me give you the most, I'm sure a whole lot of you would have heard this. This is perhaps the most daring kind of an attack which happened, a cyber attack which happened on a nuclear power facility, which in Iran, way back in 2009, 2010. The entire process of this cyber attack started using a pen drive which was inserted into one of the computers which was controlling certain systems of this enrichment plant. And why am I bringing up this example is that if a cyber criminal or a cyber terrorist is able to infiltrate into a nuclear power facility or a nuclear enrichment facility, imagine where all they can reach. So that is the reason I have brought up this example. Today, any system and every system which is networked as part of the critical infrastructure can be attacked from the cyberspace. That is what the bottom line is. And who are these people from which from whom the critical infrastructure faces threat? It is anyone and everyone, from nation state to non-state actors sponsored by nation states, to cyber terrorists, to cyber criminals, novice hackers, script kiddies. I mean, anyone. There have been examples where somebody who was trying to have fun on using some tools and was able to break into systems which are something like an electrical power grid. So anyone and everyone is a threat. So the entire spectrum of threat is so large, and the entire spectrum of vulnerabilities is so large that the kind of threat that emerges, putting these things together, the kind of threat that emerges is phenomenal for the country. Where is the threat? I mean, what is the threat? What exactly can be done to a critical infrastructure? The most first threat that is most important is the espionage. Why is there espionage against critical infrastructure? Is to gather information of what are the kind of networks it is using, what are the kind of capabilities, where do the vulnerabilities lie. So these are the kind of this is one reason, of course. And of course, second reason is to gain information from this and duplicate it into your own country, like the Chinese did with the Lockheed Martin information espionage case of Lockheed Martin, where they took out the design of the F-35 fighter, which the Americans were developing, and they reproduced it in China. So espionage could be for various reasons. The second one is subversion. Now, subversion of a network or subversion of a system is exactly like subversion of a human mind. What does subversion mean? That when a person gets subverted, he starts working for you. If I have subverted somebody, he starts working for me. Similarly, when I subvert a network or I subvert a system, a critical infrastructure, I start making it work for me. And that is a very critical situation for a nation. And third is sabotage, is that, of course, you bring it down completely and it stops working, so that the facilities that were being provided by the infrastructure are no more available to the public and to the government. One example of subversion was in 2006 and 2007, when the Israelis carried out an airstrike on a supposedly nuclear facility of Syria. It was a combination of cyber attacks along with electronic warfare and airstrikes. It is said that almost a year ago, this Trojan or a malware was inserted into the computer systems of the air defense of Syria. And when these physical attacks by the Israeli Air Force was actually being carried out, the air defense system of Syria showed that everything is well on the in the skies, and they did not even pick up these aircraft. So those are the kind of, that is a classic example of how an entire system can be subverted. A critical infrastructure air defense system can be subverted to work for you. All right. So what needs to be done? There is a host of things which a nation can and needs to do to protect its infrastructure, critical infrastructure, make them resilient, put in all facility, all kind of controls, put in all kind of technology to protect it, ensure its survivability if it is a time critical system. For example, the power grid. Power grid is a you can't have power going indefinitely in India. Of course, it really doesn't matter, but in the Western world, it is unheard of that the power has gone off for beyond a few minutes. In India, of course, if you look at the situation in Punjab today, for hours together, there is no power, but that's not what is desirable. So these are those kind of critical systems are those systems where human response, I mean, you need the response which is faster than human response. Military command and control systems are examples of this. So those kind of responses need to be developed. That kind of architecture and technology needs to be developed to ensure that the threat to the critical infrastructure is not there. Unfortunately, none of them exist today in our country. Reducing supply chain risks. So Vivek spoke about supply chain risk. Unfortunately, there is hardly any component of the critical infrastructure which is being produced in this country. Everything is ex-import. What is made where in China, whichever country, what is the kind of threat that has already been inserted, none of us know. And there can be a situation when the system is required most critically, it may just fail because of a supply chain vulnerability. And lastly, most importantly, is the human resource development and creating a cyber security awareness, which my predecessors have already spoken about at length. Why human being is the weakest link in this entire gambit of cyber security. We need to train, we need to bring in the awareness, and unless we do that, not just in business, but as a country, not just people who are protecting the critical infrastructure, but as a country, we need to be a little more aware about all this, and we need to develop human resource who can then protect the CII of the country. We are not really going nowhere.